The dog that refused to leave, even after everyone else did. It started with a report of a stray German shepherd blocking the entrance to a snow-covered forest trail. Just standing there, not barking, not growling, just waiting. Deputy Jonah Reed had seen his share of odd cases in rural Montana, but this one tugged at something quieter in him, the kind of intuition born from grief. When he stepped out of his cruiser and met the dog's eyes, there was something too still in them. Not lost, not wild, just holding. The dog didn't run. Instead, he turned and began to walk, slowly, with purpose, into the woods. Jonah followed. He didn't expect to find a baby, half buried in blankets, cheeks blue, a bracelet on its wrist with a name scratched into plastic. Noah. The dog lay beside the child like he had done it 100 times, like it had always been his job. But that wasn't even the strangest part. The strangest part was that this dog, later named Asher, had once belonged to someone who vanished, someone the dog had never stopped waiting for. The frost had come early to Ash Valley. It whispered across the earth like an old ghost, lacing the pine needles and deer tracks with silver, while the trees stood hushed in brittle reverence. Above the forest, the skies stretched pale and endless, a dull bruise of blue-gray where the sun had long since given up trying to warm the day. Wind stirred only once every few minutes, just enough to remind you that you were alone. Jonah Wren walked with quiet steps through the snow-dusted trail, his boots sinking into the softened underlayer of dirt and ice. The air stung his nostrils with each breath, crisp and almost metallic, like something sharpened on regret. Behind him, the town of Ash Valley still slept, lights off, chimneys cold. It was just past 5 in the morning. He didn't mind the solitude. It was what he had come to love most about retirement, the early hours when no one asked anything of him. No briefings, no paperwork, no press, just the woods, the sound of his breath, and the company of the 2 dogs that had never left his side. Asher padded quietly at his right, old but solid, each step deliberate and even. His black and tan coat had dulled a little over the years, silver threading through the fur around his snout. But his eyes, amber and deep, still scanned like a sentinel. You could almost forget he was retired, until he winced slightly in the front left paw, the same one that had taken the brunt of that last drug house raid 3 winters ago. On the other side, Nala trotted with restrained energy. She was all angles and alertness, 3 years old, lean as a shadow, with a patch of dark fur that ran like a apprentice, along a winding trail that had once been used by hikers, but was now barely more than a line carved by deer hooves and forgotten boots. Jonah exhaled slowly, his breath spiraling into the cold like steam from a freight train. He thought about his years as chief, the cases that kept him up at night, the ones that never quite closed. But those thoughts passed like shadows. What lingered was the quieter ache of having no one to report to, no one to protect. He reached down, absently, and rested a hand on Asher's back. The dog leaned into it for a second, as if to say, "Still here." They pressed on, weaving between trees stripped bare by November. Somewhere in the distance, a branch cracked. Not loudly, but loud enough that Asher's head rose, ears forward, eyes narrowing. He slowed. Jonah stopped too. Nala mirrored the motion without hesitation, standing taut and still. The only sound now was the crunch of his boot shifting slightly in place, and the breath of 3 living beings circling through cold lungs. Asher took 2 careful steps forward, his body low, muscles rippling subtly beneath his fur. Jonah narrowed his eyes and followed the old shepherd's gaze. There was nothing, just pine and mist, and the slow creak of ice expanding in tree bark. But Jonah had learned long ago that when Asher stopped, you listened. This dog had once found a missing toddler buried beneath snow in a backyard woodshed. He had sniffed out a dying woman inside a crushed sedan hidden under a landslide. When Asher paused like this, eyes fixed, breath silent, it meant something had shifted. Jonah whispered, more for himself than the dogs, "What is it, boy?" Asher didn't move. Then came the smallest sound, so faint Jonah nearly thought he imagined it. A rustle, not of wind or leaves, but something softer, a weight pressing against fabric. And it was coming from up ahead. Nala's head tilted slightly, ears twitching. She took 1 cautious step forward, but didn't go beyond Asher. Not yet. She was still reading the lesson written in the elder dog's body. Jonah reached for the flashlight clipped to his belt. He didn't switch it on yet, no need to flood the silence. He knew Asher would tell him when it was time. Another beat passed. And then, like a breath released, entered a hollow, an old floodplain carpeted in dead grass and flanked by gray oaks that curved upward like fingers grasping at clouds. Mist clung low here, just above the earth. Asher stopped in the center of the clearing, standing perfectly still. Jonah's breath caught before he even saw it. Because of how Asher stood, not in alert, not tense, but reverent, like someone holding vigil. Then the flashlight beams swept the ground. At first, it looked like a pile of discarded cloth, an old tarp, maybe, a hunting coat. But there was something unnatural in the shape of it, too small, too still. Jonah stepped closer, then closer still, and the world narrowed. It was a baby, wrapped in a gray, worn blanket that barely covered his limbs. His hands curled in fists the color of porcelain, his lips tinged blue. The cold had silenced even his instinct to cry. There was no movement, no sound. Jonah fell to his knees, heart thundering in his chest. "Asher," he whispered, voice cracking. The dog didn't move. He just watched, eyes locked on the bundle like a guardian who had been waiting a lifetime. Nala arrived seconds later, sniffing gently around the edge of the scene, circling, ears twitching like antennae reading frequencies of grief. Jonah reached for the child, trembling, and the scene fades into breath. The trees parted like reluctant witnesses. Asher moved first, slipping through a gap in the underbrush with the precision of muscle and memory. His body was low to the ground, not in fear, but in reverence. Nala followed, slower, cautious, still unsure if this detour off the trail was training or something more sacred. Jonah brought up the rear, one hand gripping the flashlight, the other still instinctively close to his radio. There was no path now, only branches reaching like broken ribs into the air, and the whisper of something unspoken riding the wind. The clearing opened abruptly. It wasn't wide, maybe 15 feet across, nestled in the crook of a shallow gully. Dead oak trees stood twisted around the edges, their limbs bare and brittle like ancient hands. Moss clung to the bark in frozen tufts, and the ground was carpeted with a tangle of fallen leaves gone gray with rot. Mist hovered low, just a breath above the earth, caught in the hollow like it too was holding still. Jonah's boots slowed on instinct. There was something about this place, quiet in the wrong way. Not the peace of untouched nature, but the silence of something paused. Asher stood in the center, statue still, facing a small hit the frozen earth harder than he meant, sending a dull jolt up his spine. The flashlight clattered beside him, its beams spinning wildly across the trees. Jonah ignored it. He reached trembling fingers toward the bundle and peeled the top fold of the blanket back. A face, pale, waxen, eyes shut, lashes stiff with frost. The lips, blue, the kind of blue that squeezed a man's lungs tight with fear. For a moment the silence felt permanent, then a flutter, almost nothing, a twitch in the chest, a breath so soft it could have been imagined. Jonah gasped, hand moving to check again, 2 fingers on the child's chest, gentle, pressing with just enough pressure to feel, there, a rhythm, erratic, weak, but there. Oh God, he sucked in a breath and reached beneath the baby, feeling the cold bite through his gloves. The child couldn't have been more than a few days old. No hat, no bottle, no note, just a blanket thin as sorrow, and skin the temperature of stone. Behind him, Asher didn't move. He stood sentry, gaze fixed on the child with the kind of stillness only dogs and statues could hold. Not barking, not whining, just watching, as if the world could fall apart and he wouldn't blink until the baby did. Nala circled once, nose to the ground, then lifted her head and stared into the tree line, ears twitching, reading the silence. Jonah didn't speak. There was no room for words, not here, not with a life this fragile hanging on a thread. He shrugged off his jacket in a single motion, hissing through his teeth as the cold punched through his shirt. The baby went into the crook of his arm, swaddled inside thick fabric far too large for his size. But Jonah pulled it tight, cradling him against his chest. A tremor passed through the child then, a faint spasm, more reflex than movement. The sound that followed was no louder than a sigh, but it wasn't nothing. Jonah's voice cracked when he whispered, "I've got you. Just hold on." He tapped the button on his shoulder radio. "Dispatch, this is Wren. I've located an infant, alive, but barely. Hypothermic, dehydrated. No visible injuries, but urgent condition. Coordinates incoming. I'm bringing him in now." The voice on the other end cracked through the static, but he was already moving. He grabbed the flashlight, clipped it back to his belt, and stood, slowly, carefully, without jostling the fragile form pressed against his chest. "Asher, with me." The old shepherd moved without hesitation, falling into step at Jonah's side, tail low, head. He could feel the heat leaching from his core and into the child, as if his own body was willing to trade comfort for seconds. That's all it was now, seconds. A few more heartbeats, a few more steps. The trail wasn't far. "Stay with me," he whispered. "You've made it this far, little one." A gust of wind stirred the branches above them, and a dusting of frost drifted down like ash. Jonah didn't look up. He didn't slow. Behind him, Nala gave a soft huff, Not alarmed, not afraid. Just a sound to say she was still there. Asher never looked away. Jonah didn't remember standing. Only the way the child's weight, barely more than a loaf of bread, seemed heavier than anything he had ever carried. The baby's breath fluttered shallow and irregular against Jonah's chest, warm only where their skin made contact beneath layers of fabric and desperation. His jacket, now wrapped tightly around the newborn, held in what little heat remained. But it wouldn't last. Cold had a way of stealing quietly, first from fingers, then from time. Jonah tapped the button on his shoulder radio, voice clipped, low, urgent. "This is Wren. Infant located, alive. Repeat, alive. Severe hypothermia, severe dehydration. En route now. Transmitting coordinates. Have ER standing by. I'll update in 5. He didn't wait for a reply. "Asher, with me," he said under his breath, already pivoting toward the narrow trail they'd broken coming in. The dog moved without hesitation, pressing close to his left thigh, eyes scanning the forest ahead. Nala trailed 2 steps behind, ears up, her breath leaving pale ribbons in the air. The 3 of them surged forward, not with chaos, but with the deliberate urgency of a team that had run toward danger before. But this wasn't pursuit, this wasn't search and rescue, this was preservation. The wind had shifted, no longer still. It now moved like a warning, rushing low through the trees and carrying with it the dry scent of snow. Jonah ducked beneath a limb, cradling the child tighter, adjusting his hold so that the baby's ear pressed against his heart. He could feel it then, each flutter of breath a question. Still here, still holding on, still possible. His boot struck the ground in rhythm, crunching through frost-bitten leaves, slipping once on a root half buried under brittle pine needles. He didn't fall, couldn't afford to. His breath came in quick bursts now, clouds forming, then vanishing in the wake of his pace. Asher kept alongside him like a shadow, his gait silent, purposeful. Every few steps he glanced up, not at Jonah, but at the bundle in his arms. His eyes didn't show panic, just calculation, as if he could will the baby to keep breathing by watching close enough. Jonah pushed harder. Branches clawed at his sleeves, scraping, darting left. "Eyes on," Jonah said between breaths. "Don't stray." She didn't. She veered wide, then back again, checking the tree line as if she knew that danger didn't always roar. Sometimes it crept. Sometimes it came in silence, disguised as frostbite, or a minute too late. The forest thinned slightly. Jonah recognized the curve in the trail, the broken log where they had paused on their way in. They were halfway back to the cruiser. The baby shifted. It wasn't a cry, nothing that strong. Just a soft exhale, a whimper that barely left the lips. Jonah felt it more than he heard it. His heart seized, then began to hammer even faster. He slowed just long enough to whisper, "You're doing good, just stay with me, just a little longer." He adjusted the jacket, pressing the baby's face closer to his chest. The skin was still cold, terribly cold. But the color in the cheeks, was it different now? Or was he just hoping? A gust of wind sliced across the trail, bending the trees like old bones. Snowflakes, fine and dry, began to drift down, catching in the seams of Jonah's collar, melting against his neck. Nala barked again, quieter this time. Not alarm, not warning, but urgency. She kept checking behind them, pausing every 20 paces to sniff the air. Jonah knew that behavior. She was mapping their scent trail. She was making sure they weren't being followed, or that they wouldn't be too hard to find if they failed to return. But failure wasn't an option. The baby shifted again, then fell still. Jonah didn't stop, but his voice broke through the cold. Come on, you're not done yet." His lungs burned, his legs ached, but his arms never loosened, never faltered. His entire body had bent around this one tiny life, shielding it, feeding it warmth, whispering a promise it hadn't made aloud. Not today. Not on my watch. The trees began to part. A glint of chrome reflected low through the brush, hood of the cruiser, just a few more yards. Asher moved faster now, pulling ahead slightly. He cleared the last bend and stopped beside the vehicle, facing outward as if keeping guard. His breath came slow but steady. He didn't bark. He didn't look back. He was holding the line. Jonah broke through the clearing seconds later, snow now falling in earnest. The cruiser was crusted with frost along the windshield. He reached the driver's side door, wrenched it open with a grunt, and slid into the seat with the baby still pressed against him. He kept the child in his arms. No time for a car seat, not in this moment. Nala jumped in next, settling in the passenger seat but twisting to face the back, watching Jonah's every move. Asher jumped into the back seat beside the baby, laying down with his muzzle near the bundle, not touching, threw the cruiser into gear and peeled out of the clearing, tires spitting gravel as they tore back toward the main road. Headlights pierced through the snowfall, and somewhere behind them, the forest disappeared. Jonah gritted his teeth, one hand on the wheel, the other holding the child close. "You're safe," he whispered, voice trembling with more than cold. "We've got you now." The baby didn't stir. But he didn't go still either. And that was enough for now. The cruiser's tires hummed low against the frost-hardened road, a vibration Jonah felt more through his bones than the steering wheel. The dashboard clock ticked louder than usual, each second carved out of silence. The heater sputtered weak warmth into the cabin, barely cutting the chill that clung to his coat, his skin, his thoughts. The baby lay swaddled in thermal blankets across the back seat, the same seat where Jonah had once transported fugitives in handcuffs. Now it held something far more fragile, something that couldn't fight, couldn't scream, couldn't even cry. Just breathe. Just keep breathing. Asher sat curled beside the child, chest low to the seat, muzzle resting near the edge of the makeshift cradle. He didn't blink. His eyes stayed fixed on the baby as if watching was a form of protection. As if sheer will could keep that tiny chest rising and falling. Jonah glanced into the rearview mirror again, and again, every 3 seconds. His right hand gripped the steering wheel so tightly the tendons stood out pale and rigid. His left hovered just above the baby, occasionally adjusting the blanket, checking for heat, for life, for hope. Nala sat in the front passenger seat, posture taut, nose pointed forward but ears swiveling constantly. Every flicker of passing shadow, every slight curve in the road, sent a fresh ripple of tension through her frame. She didn't look back at the child. That wasn't her role. She watched the road. She read Jonah's breath, the clenched muscles in his jaw, the rhythm of his foot on the gas. A team, silent, bound by instinct and something older than training. Fog kissed the lower part of the windshield, blurring the dark outlines of pine trees that lined either side of the road. Jonah turned up the defroster. The road twisted ahead like a thread pulled too tight. He knew this route by heart, every bend, every pothole. He had driven it in storms and in sunshine. Tonight, it felt unfamiliar, like it stretched farther than it used to. Jonah reached over and gently touched the baby's tiny foot through the blanket. Cold, but not icy. Wait slightly, never breaking gaze. His nose inched closer to the blanket, breath puffing soft clouds into the chilled air. Jonah saw it. The way the old dog's entire focus narrowed to the bundle in the seat. He had seen Asher face armed suspects and run headfirst into burning sheds, but never had he looked more still, more sure. "You know, don't you?" Jonah whispered, glancing again at the mirror. "You always did." The baby twitched, then. Just the smallest motion. An instinctual stretch, perhaps, or a muscle catching warmth. It was enough to make Jonah's heart leap so suddenly he almost veered into the roadside ditch. He corrected, exhaled shakily, and pressed a little more on the accelerator. The tires grumbled in protest. No sirens, no lights, not tonight. The town was just over the ridge, Ash Valley's sleepy silhouette tucked beneath a sky of bruise-colored clouds and low stars. The kind of night where porch lights flickered behind fogged windows, and people slept through miracles without knowing they'd happened. Jonah didn't pray often, hadn't in years, truthfully. But now, driving through a silence more sacred than stained glass, he found himself whispering to the dark. Let him live, please. Just give him a chance. He remembered the note in the cabin, the mother's hand trembling across the page, the smeared ink. Max will find someone. He always listens. That kind of faith, so desperate, so final, had been pinned to the edge of death and delivered like a prayer into the jaws of winter. And Asher had answered. Jonah swallowed hard, blinking fast. His throat felt too tight, his hands too numb, his thoughts too full. This wasn't just about a rescue. This wasn't even just about survival. It was about the story behind the silence. A mother, a dog, a child left in the woods, and the stubborn, aching possibility that someone could still be saved, even after being forgotten. They crested the ridge. Below, Ash Valley shimmered faintly, a small town wrapped in fog and Christmas lights. The first wreaths had gone up last week. He'd seen them on Main Street. Paper snowflakes taped to shop windows, plastic deer tangled in half-lit fairy lights. The hospital sat near the edge of town, its white sign glowing faintly gold in the dark. Jonah could already see it now, peeking through the mist like something waiting. He exhaled once more, then eased his foot off the gas. The baby stirred again, not much, but enough. In the back seat, Asher's ears lifted slightly, his head lowered even closer to the child. But he didn't touch. He simply watched. Nala shifted her and the weight of a second chance, everything had come into focus. The cruise's headlights spilled across the parking lot of Silvapine General like searchlights through the fog. The lot was nearly empty, just one old sedan idling beneath a flickering lamppost, and a pickup truck dusted with frost.
The hospital's emergency bay glowed in the dark like a soft lantern, all glass and humming fluorescence, its sliding doors sighing open at intervals, exhaling warmth into the winter night.
Jonah pulled up to the entrance with the urgency of a man carrying time in his arms. The vehicle hadn't even come to a full stop before he was out. One hand on the door, the other cradling the baby against his chest. The blankets were warm now, body warm, but the tiny figure inside them was still, too light, too quiet.
Let's go,
Jonah said more to himself than to anyone. But the dogs heard it. Asher jumped down first, landing softly, no leash, no hesitation. He fell into formation behind Jonah like this was just another call, another rescue, but his eyes told a different story. There was gravity there, a weight that came only when instinct and memory fused into something deeper. Nala followed, silent but alert. Her ears flicked toward every shadow. Her body language had shifted since the forest, no longer training mode sharp but something older, like she was listening for things beyond sound. Jonah reached the entrance. The glass doors hissed open, and warm air rushed over him. Heat, light, the sterile smell of disinfectant and floor wax. Inside, the waiting room was quiet. Two chairs occupied by a sleeping man with a bandaged wrist and a teenage girl cradling a sprained ankle. Jonah didn't pause. Infant. Hypothermia, dehydration, I need ER intake now, he called out, voice steady but clipped, his badge still pinned to his chest. Behind the reception desk, a nurse with squared shoulders and tired eyes looked up fast. She was already moving before he finished the sentence. Bay 2, she shouted down the corridor. Get Olivia! Jonah followed her lead, moving past the desk, past the muted hum of a vending machine, past an empty fish tank with one lone plastic castle. The hallway was a tunnel of white light and pale green linoleum. Jonah's boots echoed with each step. He didn't look down, didn't look back, just walked. A woman emerged from a side hallway, early 40s, tall, with dark braided hair pulled tight and reading glasses pushed up into her hairline. Her scrubs were deep blue, her name badge clipped straight across her chest. Lang, Olivia, ER supervisor. She met Jonah with a kind of calm forged in fire, calm that only comes after years of chaos and grief and long nights watching machines beep and flatline. Vitals? She asked as she walked, already slipping on gloves. Shallow breath, unresponsive, skin cold. Found him wrapped in a blanket, no other injuries, Jonah answered, eyes still on this.
Bundle. No name. Olivia nodded once, firmly. Let's move. The ER room was warm, clean. A faint scent of plastic tubing and antiseptic filled the space. A pediatric bed sat in the center with warming lamps already flickering on above it. Monitors blinked. A nurse, young, buzz-cut, steady hands, was prepping an oxygen mask. Jonah placed the baby down with the care of someone setting firefly wings onto glass. "Come on, little one," he whispered. Olivia was already checking the baby's pulse, peeling back layers, her fingers nimble, professional. The other nurse connected wires, attached monitors, and turned on a soft heating pad. Jonah stepped back, arms suddenly empty. The cold rushed in again, only this time it wasn't physical. Asher lay down at the doorway. He didn't enter, didn't pace. Just rested his front paws precisely over the threshold, his body a line between hallway and child. His eyes didn't leave the bed. Nala sat beside him, ears twitching at every beep. She kept glancing from Jonah to the baby, to Olivia's steady hands, as if calculating the probability of hope. Inside the room, Olivia's voice stayed calm, but her brow furrowed as she checked the vitals.
Heart rate's low but steady, temps rising slowly. Lungs are weak, but there's movement.
She murmured to the team.
No visible trauma, no bruising, no fractures.
She looked up, meeting Jonah's eyes.
You found him just in time.
Jonah exhaled, half relief, half held back grief. His hands hovered useless at his sides. "He was alone," he said softly. "No bottle, no bag, just left." Olivia's expression didn't change much, but her voice softened.
Not everyone walks into an ER. Some crawl, some send others.
She glanced once toward the dogs at the door, then looked again, longer this time. Her gaze locked on Asher.
That's not just a companion dog, is it?
Jonah shook his head. Retired canine, 7 years on the job. His name's Asher.
And the other?
Still learning, Jonah said. Her name's Nala. Olivia nodded slowly, eyes narrowing with something almost like awe.
That dog hasn't blinked once.
Jonah followed her gaze. Asher was still as stone, his chest rising and falling in calm cadence. His focus hadn't shifted even as nurses moved around the bed. "He doesn't move," Jonah said, voice quieter now. "Not when it matters." A faint sound filled the room. Not quite a whimper, not quite a cry. Olivia looked, never left their post. Something stirred. Life. Barely. But enough. The hum of machines became the only rhythm in the room. It pulsed quietly, steadily, like breath made visible. Like a heartbeat the world had almost given up on. The baby's chest now rose and fell under a web of warmed blankets, surrounded by tubes and cords and blinking green light. But it wasn't the technology that held the stillness together. It was the dog in the doorway. Asher hadn't moved, not since the moment Jonah had stepped back and let go. Not since the baby had been laid on that narrow bed beneath sterile light and urgent hands. He had simply positioned himself at the threshold, paws lined neatly with the linoleum tile, body parallel to the doorframe, head turned just enough to keep the child in sight. He didn't blink, he didn't whine or fidget. He just watched. Not with fear, not even with concern, but with a gaze Jonah had only seen a handful of times before, on long nights in the field, on the edge of something fragile. It wasn't a stare of obedience. It was older than that. It was devotion. Nala sat beside him now, no longer restless. Her earlier tension had softened into something measured, like she too had recognized that this wasn't training anymore. This was something sacred. Across the room, Olivia Lang adjusted the IV line, her hands steady but her eyes wandering. She had seen gunshot victims, overdoses, survivors clinging by a thread. She had lost children before. Too many. More than anyone should. But she'd never seen a dog refuse to blink like this. She stepped back from the crib, exhaling slowly. "Does he always do that?" she asked, voice just above a whisper. Jonah was leaning against the wall, arms crossed, but his attention hadn't drifted. He followed her gaze to Asher. "Only when it matters." Olivia tilted her head slightly, as if studying a rare painting. "It's not obedience," she said, more to herself than anyone else. "It's not even guarding. That's something else." Jonah nodded once. "It's protection," he replied, "and memory." Olivia blinked at that, caught off guard by the quiet weight in his voice. She looked again at Asher, his posture, the set of his shoulders, the slow, deliberate rhythm of his breathing. He didn't flinch when the monitor beeped louder. He didn't move when a nurse brushed past. He was carved from stillness, anchored by something deeper than instinct. "What kind of dog does that?" Olivia asked softly. Jonah didn't hesitate, twitched. The baby exhaled, longer this time, almost a sigh, and then made a sound. Just a small one. Not a cry, not yet, but something, a protest, a whisper, a declaration that he was still here. Jonah stepped forward on instinct as if to help, but Olivia raised a hand gently. "It's okay," she said. "Let him find his own rhythm." Jonah nodded, backing off, eyes drifting back to the dogs. Nala had lowered herself to the floor, her front legs stretched out, head still upright, but no longer tense. She watched Asher the way children watch a father tying a tie, copying, learning, waiting to understand. Olivia crouched slowly at the doorway, about 2 feet from Asher. She didn't reach for him, just studied him from that distance. "You were there, weren't you?" she said softly. Asher didn't move, but his ear flicked once. "You found him." Stillness. "You brought him here." She glanced toward Jonah. "I've seen a lot of things, Chief. A lot of good dogs, a lot of smart ones. But this, she shook her head slightly. This feels like something else. Jonah pushed his hand into the pocket of his coat, voice quiet. He's retired. Wasn't even supposed to be working anymore, but something in him, he just knew. He led me off the trail like it was scripted, like someone had whispered it to him. Maybe someone did, Olivia said. Jonah looked at her. I don't mean that lightly, she added. I've been in this room too long not to believe there's more to loyalty than we can chart on paper. Asher shifted then, barely, a small lowering of his head. His nose brushed the line between tile and air, still watching, still silent. Jonah looked at him and saw it again. Not a dog fulfilling a command, but a sentry fulfilling a promise. The kind of promise that didn't need words, the kind that endured winter, the kind a child could live because of. Olivia stood, brushing her palms together as if shaking off dust. Let's give him a little more time. If vitals stay steady another 20 minutes, we'll move him to a heated isolette. Jonah nodded. I'll stay close. We'll set up a chair by the window. And the dogs? Olivia looked again at the pair. Leave them, she said. They're part of this. She stepped out into the hallway, leaving the door half open. Nala's gaze followed her, then shifted back to Asher. The younger dog let out a soft huff, more exhale than sound. Jonah sat down beside the window, elbows on knees, eyes on the child. Asher blinked just once, but he never looked away. The wind had changed by the time Jonah reached the tree line. It came colder now, curling low across the snow-packed ground. The old logging road was barely drivable. Branches arched across the trail, brittle with frost. The tires crunched over ice and frozen pine cones. The cruiser's headlights caught brief flickers of movement, birds mostly, once a fox. But otherwise the forest watched in silence. Jonah parked just short of the clearing. He killed the engine but left the heater running, glancing once in the rear view. Asher sat upright in the back, steady as ever. Nayla, in the passenger seat, was already alert, nose pressed lightly to the glass. The cabin came into view as Jonah stepped out, its roof sagging to one side, porch half collapsed under the weight of snow and time. The paint had long since peeled away, leaving only weather-worn wood and rusted hinges that creaked even without movement. Deputy Matt Hale waited near the tree line, pacing a little too much for someone off duty. Young, buzzed haircut, lean frame that didn't quite fit his uniform yet. His breath came fast in the cold, puffing out in clouds as he rubbed his gloved hands together. "Morning, Chief," he said, stepping forward. Jonah nodded. "You the one who got the tip?" "Neighbor 2 lots over," Matt replied. "Said she heard something moving around yesterday. No one's supposed to be living up here anymore." Jonah looked past him toward the dark cabin windows, the ones where no curtains hung and no light had flickered for months. What kind of something? Couldn't say. Maybe a raccoon, maybe a squatter. Said it didn't sound like animals. Said it sounded heavier. Jonah turned to open the back door. Asher leapt down without a sound, landing on packed snow, ears already swiveling. Nayla followed with less grace, but equal focus. Matt eyed the dogs with a mix of respect and uncertainty. "You think they'll find anything?" Jonah didn't answer. He just nodded once toward the cabin. "Let's go." The snow thinned as they approached, the ground beneath the porch littered with broken shingles and scattered twigs. A single boot print was pressed shallowly into the edge of the wood, old, partially filled with ice. The front door hung slightly ajar. Jonah gave it a push. It creaked open with a sound like bones shifting. The smell hit first. Mildew, old milk, something sour beneath it all, like wet carpet and spoiled formula, the kind of smell that settled into your clothes. Asher moved ahead without pause, nose low, tail still. Jonah followed, his flashlight beam sweeping slowly across the space. The living room was small, sparse. An overturned camping chair, a crumpled fleece blanket in one corner, wrappers, an empty can of soup. Beside the fireplace, long, cold, and stained with ash, was an old space heater tipped on its side. The extension cord that fed it curled out through a cracked window. Slats half broken, one leg snapped clean through. Inside, a ragged towel, balled up and pressed flat by time. Near it, a pacifier, dust-covered, forgotten. Jonah crouched. His fingers brushed something beneath the towel, thin, folded, and slightly damp. Paper. He held it up to the flashlight. A page torn from a legal pad, the edges curled and darkened by mildew. The handwriting was rushed, pressed too hard into the page. The letters shook. I ran out of food, of heat, of everything. I told Max to find someone. He always listened. I hope he does this time. I hope you understand. I didn't know what else to do. I didn't know how to say goodbye. Please don't hate me. Please tell him. I tried. No name, just heartbreak soaked into the grain of the paper. Jonah's throat tightened. He read it again, slower this time. His hand dropped to Asher's head, grounding himself in the warmth of fur. Max, he whispered. Asher's ear flicked, almost imperceptibly. Matt stepped up behind him. What is it? Jonah didn't answer at first. He just passed him the note. Matt read it once, then swallowed. She left him for the dog. Jonah nodded. No, she left him with the dog. He stood slowly, looking around the room again, not for clues, those were already here, but for meaning. For what kind of desperation had soaked this place until there was nothing left to breathe but regret? In the kitchen he found a single broken bottle on the counter, a crusted ring of dried formula near the sink, an overturned laundry basket in the corner with a single infant sock inside. Everything about the house screamed of someone who hadn't intended to disappear, but had run out of choices. Nala barked once from the back hallway. Jonah stepped through. In a side room, little more than a storage closet, she stood beside an overturned duffel. Torn zippers, scattered diapers, a box of matches, an empty dog food bowl, and beside it, a collar. Weathered, cracked leather, large. The name tag was missing, but the impression was there. The wear around the holes, the shape of the clasp. Jonah crouched and picked it up slowly. The silence that followed felt thick. She gave him an order, he murmured. She sent him. Asher stepped into the room, his paws silent on warped floorboards. He moved to the collar, then sat beside it. Not on command, empty space, ringed with wear. Jonah held it gently in his gloved hands, the way one might hold a photograph found at the bottom of a forgotten drawer, not because it would break, but because of what it still remembered. The loop had clearly belonged to a large dog, one like Asher. Its shape had curved with a neck that once bore responsibility and comfort, and perhaps the last anchor to a fading world. He crouched beside the window where it had been folded, half buried in dust and hair and pine needles that had slipped through a cracked pane long ago. Outside, the wind pushed against the broken shutters. Inside, Jonah stared down at the collar, as if it might blink. Asher stood just behind him, silent, still. His breath fogged the cold air with soft clouds. Jonah didn't need to turn to know the shepherd's eyes were fixed on the collar too. "Max," Jonah said, so low it barely counted as speech. Asher's ears twitched. Jonah let the name settle between them. The room didn't feel empty anymore. It felt inhabited by something heavier than absence. Nala wandered in slowly, her tail low, curiosity flickering behind her steps. She sniffed the air, then turned to a small pile in the corner, an open laundry bag, stained and stiff with age. She nosed gently through it, until a corner of pale blue caught the light. Jonah rose, walked over, and knelt beside her. There, between a damp towel and an old sweater, was a tiny onesie. Size newborn, faded blue cotton with tiny white stars. The snap buttons were partially undone, and one shoulder seam had been hand-stitched, the thread uneven. He picked it up carefully. The fabric was stiff from cold and time, but as he held it, it softened a little, as though recognizing a familiar warmth. It smelled faintly of something human, milk maybe, or skin, or memory. He didn't realize how tightly he was gripping it until his knuckles turned pale. "I think this belonged to the baby," he murmured. No one answered, not Nala, not Asher, but the silence spoke anyway. Jonah turned slowly toward the empty bowl on the floor. Thick ceramic, cracked along the rim. No name, just a smear of dried residue and a chip in the glaze. It sat close to the baseboard, as if someone had tucked it out of the way before leaving. No, not before leaving, before sending. Jonah stood in the middle of the room now, the collar in one hand, the onesie in the other, the bowl resting near his feet like a quiet witness. He looked at Asher. "You had a name before us, didn't you?" Asher didn't move. Jonah exhaled slowly. "Max." The dog blinked once, not in reaction, but recognition. It wasn't proof, not the kind a judge left her baby to die. She had left him with Max. Asher. Jonah moved to the edge of the crib, the one with splintered sides and a sunken mattress. His fingers trailed the rails. He imagined her there, this woman they hadn't found yet. Pale, exhausted, maybe bruised, laying the baby down, wrapping him in that thin blanket, whispering something to the dog, "Find someone, go." Jonah had spent 20 years in uniform. He had seen desperate people do cruel things, but this didn't feel like cruelty. It felt like something much harder. A surrender wrapped in hope. Matt appeared in the doorway, glancing around the room before his eyes landed on the collar in Jonah's hand. "You get something?" Jonah nodded once. "Pieces." Matt stepped inside, brows furrowed. "You think the dog really knew? Like, knew to bring you to him?" "I don't think," Jonah said quietly. "I know." Matt shifted awkwardly. "I didn't even know Asher had another name." "Neither did I," Jonah replied. He looked down at the dog again. "But he did, and someone loved him enough to say it like a prayer." Nala let out a soft whine, not anxious, just present. Jonah placed the collar on the windowsill, next to a broken Polaroid of someone's legs standing in snow. The image had no faces, no clarity, just fragments. But that felt fitting. Everything about this place was fragments. He turned back to the room, soaked in cold, half-shadowed, and full of things too quiet to speak. It wasn't a crime scene, not exactly. It wasn't abandonment in the traditional sense. It was a heartbreak with a plan. Jonah walked to the door. Asher followed, his paws silent, his tail low. Before crossing the threshold, the shepherd paused and looked back, one last glance toward the collar, the onesie, the bowl. Jonah watched him. "I think you knew," he whispered. "And I think you chose to remember." They stepped out into the cold again. Snow began to fall, light, slow, delicate, like memory descending from the sky. The air in the cabin had a stillness to it, not silence, not peace, just a stillness that settled over everything, like the dust coating the windowsill, the crib's headboard, and the half-folded blanket that remained at its foot. The kind of dust that meant no one had been here for a long, long time. But someone had never truly left. Asher lay curled beside the crib, not guarding, not waiting, just being. His massive body made no sound against the worn floorboards. Head lowered to the faded wood, nose just inches from the corner of the mattress, where the baby had once been laid. He didn't close his eyes. He didn't whine. He just remained, like a living memory rooted in grief too old to cry out. Jonah stood. "You're reading this. It means he found someone. I don't know if that makes me selfish. I don't know if I'll ever be forgiven. But I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't keep her safe, but he could. He always could. Please, don't hate me." It wasn't signed. Jonah looked toward the crib, toward Asher, and the words hit differently this time. This wasn't a note of someone fleeing responsibility. It was the desperate imprint of someone broken, so shattered they could no longer hold their world together, but still lucid enough to leave a single thread behind, a thread made of fur and memory and obedience. Jonah crouched down next to Asher. He didn't speak for a while, just sat there, shoulder to shoulder with the shepherd, close enough to feel the dog's warmth through his jacket. "I used to think," Jonah began softly, "that there were only two kinds of people who left their kids behind, monsters and victims." Asher didn't move. "But I don't think she was either," he went on, voice rough. "I think she was out of options. I think the world cornered her." Jonah unfolded the note again, his hands gentler now. "She didn't leave him to die," he said aloud. His throat tightened. "She left him to Max." Asher shifted, barely. His eyes moved, not toward Jonah, but toward the note. Then, slowly, he stood, one paw placed forward, then another, not with the rigidity of command, but the weight of memory. He stepped to the crib and pressed his nose against the rail, right where the baby's head would have rested. And Jonah saw it, so plainly, it hurt, not obedience. Loyalty. Even now, even months, maybe years, after it all went silent, Asher remembered who he had been, who he had belonged to, and who he had been entrusted to protect. Jonah rose to his feet. He looked around the room again, more carefully this time. The torn sweater near the fireplace, the child's pacifier beneath the dresser, the framed photo face down beside the mattress. Each thing a breadcrumb not of shame, but of a life once fiercely held together by someone who had simply run out of rope. He moved to the wall where paint had peeled around a pinned scrap of fabric. He tugged it loose gently. It was the corner of a baby blanket, stitched with a name, Isla, the same name they'd found on the hospital bracelet. That was her. That was the child Asher had led them to. That was the child who was never truly abandoned. Jonah folded the blanket, pressed it to his chest, and exhaled through tight lips. "She left everything that mattered to him," he whispered, his voice cracking now. "Everything that proved she loved her." A soft step behind him, Nala, watching from the hallway, her eyes unusually quiet. Jonah looked toward the doorway, and the light outside had shifted, dusk bleeding into deeper blue. Snow had started again, faint through the trees, dusting the old porch like a sheet. Didn't look away from the crib. Jonah returned to the note and placed it gently on the windowsill next to the leather collar. Then he did something he hadn't done in years. He knelt beside Asher, placed a hand on the thick fur between his shoulders, and whispered the name softly, like an echo returned home. Max. The shepherd turned, ever so slowly, and looked Jonah in the eye. For just a moment, the lines of time blurred. The police dog, the protector, the abandoned, the trusted. All of it coalesced into a single gaze, steady, ancient, and full of unshed grief. Jonah swallowed hard. "We'll find her," he said quietly. "Whoever she was. We owe her that." Asher blinked once, then stepped forward, resting his chin gently on the edge of the crib. A gesture not of mourning, but of memory. Jonah stood beside him, the snow falling in heavier sheets outside, covering the forest floor like silence over a story almost forgotten. The dust in the cabin swirled gently in the cold air. But the truth, once buried in grief, had stirred again. The old porch groaned beneath Jonah's boots as he stepped up, careful not to let the screen door slam behind him. The small house sat on the south slope, just outside the tree line that guarded the abandoned cabin, close enough to see its chimney from the right window, far enough to pretend it wasn't there. Mrs. Eleanor Alder lived alone now. Her husband had passed 6 winters ago, and her sons had long since moved to places with names too bright and far away to feel real. But her mind remained sharp, the kind of memory that didn't just store facts, but feelings. She answered the door before he knocked. "I saw you drive up," she said, voice papery but firm. "You're from the sheriff's office?" "Yes, ma'am." Jonah nodded. "Jonah Keller. Mind if I come in for a minute?" She stepped aside without a word, but her eyes scanned his face with quiet appraisal, the same way someone reads a familiar poem for the first time in decades, unsure where the lines might lead. Inside smelled like lemon oil and dry cedar. A wood-burning stove clicked softly in the corner, radiating warmth through the modest living room. There were hand-stitched quilts folded on the armrest, and a framed photo of a soldier in Vietnam resting above the mantel, untouched by dust. Jonah sat when she gestured, removing his hat, balancing it on his knee. "I'm here about the woman who used to live in the cabin down the hill," he said gently. "Do you remember anyone staying there in the last few years?" "Hardly. Least that's what she told me. But I never saw any mail delivered there, and she never had visitors. Just that dog." Jonah's chest tightened. "A German shepherd?" Mrs. Alder nodded slowly. "Loyal as Sunday sunrise. She called him Max. Spoke to him like you would a person. Not like giving commands, but like she trusted he understood." Jonah felt the name ripple through him again. Max. Not just a memory, not just a code, but someone who had been hers before he became anything else. "She walked to my porch once a week," Mrs. Alder continued. "Always brought back my pie tin, always clean. She never stayed long. Eyes always searching the tree line, like she was listening for footsteps no one else could hear." Jonah didn't interrupt. There was something sacred in the way the old woman spoke, a kind of reverence, as if Elise had left behind not just traces of herself, but something fragile and worthy. "She had bruises once," Mrs. Alder added after a pause. "Faded, but you could tell. One under her eye. She said she slipped on the creek path, but Max didn't look like he believed her." "Did she ever mention where she came from, or why she was there?" Mrs. Alder shook her head. "No, but sometimes I caught her watching the school bus from behind the trees, just standing there, not moving, like she missed something she couldn't get back." Jonah swallowed. That image clung to him, a woman bruised, hiding and yet drawn to the sound of children. She sang, too, Mrs. Alder said suddenly. Soft, hummed lullabies when she didn't know I was listening. I'd be weeding the garden and hear her voice through the pine needles. Always the same tune, something in French, I think. Jonah leaned back, trying to piece the ghost of this woman from the puzzle she'd left behind. Elise Hartley, a woman who vanished without being seen, but not without being felt. She stopped coming by last winter, Mrs. Alder said finally. I thought maybe she'd moved on. But Max came alone once, stood right there on the porch, no leash, no sound, just looked at me, like he was waiting for me to understand something. Jonah felt his throat grow tight. He remembered that same gaze, in the hospital, at the crib, in the cabin, eyes that didn't blink, eyes that held memory in silence. Mrs. Alder smiled, thin and sad. I left a blanket outside. He didn't take it, just turned and walked back into the trees. Do you still have anything of hers? Jonah asked, rising gently. The old woman thought for a moment, then walked to a narrow drawer in the kitchen. She returned with a faded photograph, dog-eared at the corners. She gave me this, said it was then, his ears alert but his gaze already solemn. There was light in her expression. Not joy exactly, but something even rarer. A moment when she forgot to be afraid. Jonah exhaled. She trusted him, he whispered. Mrs. Alder nodded. He was her last anchor. When she let go, I think she gave him the map. Jonah tucked the photo into his coat. She saved that child, he murmured. She saved her by trusting the only soul who never left her side. As he stepped onto the porch again, snow still whispered in the pines. But this time, the world didn't feel quite so cold. Max, Asher, stood by the cruiser, eyes raised toward the door. Jonah met his gaze. We have her name now, he said quietly. And we're not done. The dog didn't move, didn't need to. Some things, once remembered, never leave again. Jonah lingered a moment longer on the front porch, the faded photo of Elise and Max still warm in his coat pocket, as if it had held memory like heat. The snow had lightened. A hush settling over the woods like an old promise remembered. Mrs. Alder opened the door again, her knit shawl now draped tightly across her shoulders. I forgot something, she said, or maybe I just hadn't remembered it until now. Jonah followed her back inside, where the air held the comfort of age. Lemon polish, wood smoke, and something faintly floral, like dried rose petals tucked in a drawer. She guided him to the window overlooking her back garden, or what used to be one. Winter had turned the once tended beds into low mounds of snow and shadow, but her finger pointed toward a cluster of knotted stems near the stone path. There, she said, that's where the peonies come up in May. They're early bloomers, brave enough to open when the frost hasn't quite let go. That's where it happened. Jonah tilted his head. What happened? Mrs. Alder didn't speak at first. Instead, she reached for the teapot on the counter, poured warm water into a porcelain cup with a chip on the rim, and held it in both hands like a memory too delicate to rush. It was last spring, she said finally, one of those rare days when the sun sneaks through early, makes everything look like it might forgive you. I was on the porch, sewing a hem that wouldn't cooperate, when I heard humming. Jonah knew that sound, the one she'd mentioned before. Elise, humming lullabies to no one but the wind and the dog beside her. I looked up and saw her there, in the garden, Mrs. Alder continued, walked over and tucked it behind Max's ear. Jonah tried to picture it. The stoic German shepherd, noble and vigilant, standing in the snow-shadowed garden with a flower gently nestled above his cheek. She didn't laugh, didn't make a show of it, Mrs. Alder said, just smoothed his fur, whispered something too soft for me to hear. And Max, he didn't flinch. He didn't shake it off or lower his head. He just stood taller. Her voice cracked slightly, like he'd just been knighted. Jonah's chest tightened. There was something so intimate, so precise about that act, as if Elise had crowned the last creature on earth who still believed in her. She knew she didn't have long, Mrs. Alder said, more to herself than to Jonah. You could see it in the way she lingered over small things, the way she brushed snow off pine branches with care, like she was telling the world goodbye in pieces. Outside, the wind stirred, rattling the old window glass with the faint tremor of memory. Jonah's fingers rested on the edge of the table. He saw the scene unfold in his mind. Elise, fragile and quiet, bending toward beauty in a world that had given her so little of it. And Max, or Asher, receiving that bloom like a burden and a blessing all at once. That wasn't just affection, Jonah murmured. That was her giving him a mission. Mrs. Alder looked at him, eyes glistening but clear. Exactly. It was like she passed something into him with that flower, a message too heavy for words. Jonah stood and stepped back toward the door. "Thank you," he said, "for remembering this." She followed him to the threshold, placing a hand gently on his arm. "Sheriff," she said, "do you think he understands what she asked of him?" Jonah glanced toward the cruiser parked below the slope, where Asher waited, upright, unwavering, his breath fogging softly in the air, like a ghost who refused to fade. "I don't think he ever forgot," Jonah said, "even when everyone else did." Mrs. Alder nodded, then slowly reached for a small bundle resting on a side shelf, wrapped in a cloth handkerchief, stained but neatly folded. "I found this in the garden that day," she said, "after they'd gone. Thought it was just a napkin at first, but—" She unwrapped it to reveal a single dried peony. The color faded to ivory, edges curled like the corners of a photograph left in the sun. But what she couldn't. The wind stirred again, but Asher didn't blink. His eyes remained steady, not focused on the flower, but on something far beyond it, as if even now he was still listening for her voice. And maybe, just maybe, he still heard it. The kettle had stopped its soft whistle, but Mrs. Eleanor Alder's fingers still lingered around its porcelain handle, as if heat could coax out one last memory. Jonah waited in the doorway, hat tucked beneath his arm, the fragile peony pressed between two layers of tissue in his coat pocket. Outside, Asher and Nala paced a slow circle around the cruiser, their shapes half hidden by drifting snow. Eleanor cleared her throat. "There's one more thing," she said, voice catching on the edge of hesitation. "It's foolish, really. I almost threw it away." Jonah's attention sharpened. In this investigation, nothing foolish had been useless. Not the dust on the crib rails, not the faded onesie, not a single petal of a long-dead flower. "May I see it?" he asked gently. She nodded, disappearing into the short hallway lined with wedding portraits and sepia childhood snapshots. Jonah eyed the photos, a young Eleanor laughing beside a cherry tree, her husband in army fatigues, two college-aged sons whose names he suddenly wished he knew. Lives neatly catalogued, nothing like the torn pages and scattered memories of the cabin down the hill. Eleanor returned with a small envelope. Lavender, edges worn, no stamp. She held it with both hands, as if afraid it might crumble. "I found this in my mailbox 2 months ago. No return address." Her thumb traced a smudge of dirt on the flap. "I thought it was junk, but when I opened it, I recognized the handwriting." Jonah accepted the envelope carefully and slid out a card embossed with watercolor balloons and curly gold script, "Happy First Birthday." Inside, the printed rhyme had been crossed out. In its place, a single line, "For the light you brought me, even when the world went dark." Below the line, in smaller, shakier print, "Love, Mommy." Jonah's breath caught. The ink, the slight backward slant, it matched the note from the crib. "She wrote this." Eleanor nodded. "I'm sure of it. Elise left it by mistake, I think. She must have been distracted that morning." Jonah turned the card over. On the back, near the bottom corner, was a phone number scribbled in blue pen, digits looping into one another as if written in haste. No name, no area code indication beyond the familiar local exchange. "It's the first solid lead we've had," he murmured. Eleanor's fingers fluttered at her collar. "I didn't know what to do with it. I'm sorry I didn't come sooner." "You did the right thing." Drumming louder than the ringtone. 1 ring, 2, 3. On the 4th, the call transferred to voicemail. A digital chime, then silence, then a soft, weary female voice. "You've reached 555-0147. I can't answer right now. Please leave it after the tone." The beep might as well have been a gunshot in the quiet room. Jonah drew a breath, steady, deliberate. "Hello," he began, voice low but clear. "My name is Jonah Keller with the Ash Valley Sheriff's Department. If this is Elise Hartley, or if you know Elise, please listen carefully." He looked out the window, imagining the woman on the other side of the line, hollow-eyed, coat too thin, praying into darkness. "Your son is alive," he said, letting each word drop like a stone into still water. "He's safe. He's warm. And we're caring for him right now at Silverpine General Hospital. Please, call me back." He left his direct line twice, then ended the call. The room exhaled with him. Eleanor sank into a floral-patterned armchair. "Will she answer, you think?" "I don't know," Jonah admitted. "But if that number's hers, it means she hasn't left completely. She wants to be found, even if she's afraid." He slipped the card into an evidence sleeve and tucked it into his inside pocket beside the peony. 2 delicate artifacts side by side, one wilting in silence, the other pulsing with possibility. Snowflakes thickened outside, swirling like white confetti around the porch light. Jonah buttoned his coat and offered Eleanor a grateful nod. "You've given us her name, her words, and now her voice." He tipped an imaginary hat, his hands too full to lift the real one. "That's more than we had this morning." Eleanor gave a brittle smile. "Bring her home if you can." "I intend to." He stepped into the frigid air, boots crunching over fresh snow. Asher met him at the bottom of the steps, tail sweeping once against Jonah's leg. Wordless reassurance. Nala flanked the other side, eyes bright, sensing a shift in their mission. Jonah opened the cruiser door, but paused, looking down at the shepherd. "She wrote a card, Max," he whispered, using the name with reverence. "She meant for someone to see it." Asher's ears pricked forward, as if the sound of that name carried its own direction. Jonah's phone buzzed. Not a call, just the screen lighting up with no new voicemail. His heartbeat steadied. She hadn't responded yet. But the seed had been planted. Sometimes hope took root in silence. He climbed into the driver's seat, engine turning over in a low growl. As headlights cut through the thickening snow, him, Asher settled, gaze fixed on the road ahead. And Jonah found himself whispering the words he'd left on the message, as if repeating them could weave them into truth. "Your son is alive. He's safe. We're waiting." The cruiser disappeared into the snowy dark, taillights pulsing like twin heartbeats, retreating toward hope. Inside, between man and dog and the hush of falling snow, a fragile line rang quietly, waiting to be answered. Morning never quite reached Pinecrest Park. It merely hovered there, pale and unfinished, like a canvas someone stopped painting when the colors ran dry. November's chill had stripped most of the elms bare, leaving their branches clawing at the low sky. Pigeons huddled on lamp-posts, too cold to bother scattering when joggers passed. Somewhere, a maintenance truck rattled over cracked asphalt, but even that mechanical clatter felt muted, as if wrapped in gauze. Beneath one of the park's oldest maples, its bark fissured, canopy thinning into spindly silhouettes, sat Elise Hartley. She didn't own the space so much as disappear into it. From a distance, she looked like another forgotten pile of winter clothing. Oversized army green coat, frayed cuffs swallowing her hands, black leggings caked with dried mud, shoes held together by duct tape and stubborn faith. But the closer you came, the more the human shape sharpened. The brittle angle of shoulders, the slight tremor in her knees, a tangle of hair the color of dark wheat after fire. Elise rocked, slow and rhythmical, as if the ground beneath her were water and motion alone kept her afloat. Each forward sway ended on a whisper. Every retreat drew in a rasp of thin breath. Her lips moved relentlessly, crafting sentences too soft, too fast to reach anyone else. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. Mommy tried. Just wanted you warm, Max promised. Hush now, hush." Anyone strolling by might have mistaken her for someone lost in prayer or madness. Few lingered long enough to decide. People felt the gravity of certain kinds of sorrow. They could not name it, but they recognized its pull and stepped around it the way sailors steer clear of whirlpools. She clutched a faded baby mitten in her left hand. Pink once, now sun-bleached to a colorless blush, its tiny thumb threadbare. She kept turning it over, thumb to palm, palm to thumb, as if testing for traces of warmth that might still hide in the fleece. Each pass left darker smudges of dirt on the fabric, until the mitten looked bruised. In her right pocket, an old flip phone sat silent. The battery had been dead. Weather map. She winced, though nothing touched her. Rocking harder now, knees drawing in until her shoes pressed against the frozen dirt. "You're warm now, baby. Someone's arms, better than mine." "Hush." Her eyes, those wide milk-glass discs, refused to focus on anything but a memory only she could see. They were rimmed red and rimmed again by dark half-moons of sleepless nights. Tears would have frozen on her cheeks, but there were no tears left, only a raw shine. A solitary jogger, colorful windbreaker, earbuds jammed tight, slowed when he noticed her. Concern flickered across his face, but he kept going. People always kept going. Elise didn't lift her head, though she felt the movement in the air like a ripple. Her rocking slowed to a stop, then resumed, smaller motions now, as if she feared the ground might break if she pushed too hard. The maple above her had once flowered with peonies in spring, grafted decades ago by a gardener who believed in impossible pairings. Now only a handful of brittle stems survived at its base. Elise's gaze slid down to them, lingered, and for an instant something almost tender flickered behind her eyes. She reached out, fingers trembling, and touched the nearest stem, feeling its emptiness. No bloom would come this year. The graft had failed long ago. Memories slipped in anyway, bright, traitorous things. Max, sitting tall beneath another tree months earlier, a fresh peony tucked behind his ear. Her own laughter, light and startled, like someone hearing herself for the first time. The baby's small squirm against her chest. For a blink she could smell the warm earth, hear Max's slow pant of contentment. Then the winter wind sliced through the park, shredding the vision into silvery flakes of regret. Her rocking stopped again. The mitten fell from her hand, landing on the dirt with a muffled puff. Elise watched it, breathing hard, shoulders shaking though she made no sound. She pressed both hands flat to the ground, desperate for steadiness, but the earth felt as unstable as water. In that instant, despair settled around her like soot, old, inevitable, clinging. It whispered the same brutal refrain, "He's gone. You gave him away to a night colder than this. Max failed. You failed." She closed her eyes, and the park spun. Swings creaking without children, pigeons warbling like distant sobs, the chills seeping through her torn shoes into bones that already felt like glass. A siren wailed somewhere beyond the tree line. Ambulance or patrol, she couldn't tell. It rose, fell, faded. Elise didn't look up. Sirens were reminders of worlds that kept moving without her consent. She curled into herself, trembling up through her palms. A low canine whine drifted on the air, soft, familiar, impossible. Her eyes snapped open. Across the thinning patch of grass, a German shepherd stood motionless beneath a street lamp. Snowflakes clung to his black and tan coat. A dried flower petal caught in the fur behind his ear. He didn't bark. He simply waited, head cocked, gaze fixed on her with unwavering intensity. Elise's mouth parted, but no sound emerged. Her body tipped forward as if pulled by a string. Recognition burst behind her ribs, equal parts hope and terror. "Max?" she rasped, voice cracked from disuse. The dog took a single step, tail low, eyes bright with a knowing only she could understand. Behind him, a tall man in a snow-dusted sheriff's coat watched with quiet urgency. Elise's world narrowed to the shepherd's eyes, old gold, steady, and impossibly alive. And somewhere beneath the pounding of her heart, a thought pierced the dark. Maybe the world hasn't ended after all. Snow was falling again, slow, fine, like sifted flour from an unseen hand. It settled gently on cracked pavement and the shoulders of the trees, draping the world in hush. The park held its breath. Jonah Keller stood just beyond the reach of the crooked lamp-post, one hand resting lightly on Nala's harness, the other open by his side. His breath clouded in the cold, but his eyes didn't leave the woman curled beneath the old maple. She looked so small, not just thin or cold, small in the way someone becomes after carrying sorrow too long, as if grief had been wearing her from the inside out. Asher stood ahead of them, unmoving. The old shepherd had stopped 5 paces short of her. His tail hung low, Not wagging. This wasn't joy. It was recognition forged in instinct, in something ancient that no training had taught him. Snow gathered on his back and stuck to the gray at his muzzle. He did not blink. Jonah had seen Asher still before, on stakeouts, in danger, but never like this. This was reverence. "Elise," he said, his voice soft, barely more than the crunch of frost underfoot. She didn't move. Her shoulders were hunched forward, her arms wrapped around her knees like a girl waiting out a storm. The only part of her that moved was the mitten in her hand, thumb pressing into palm again and again like a heartbeat that refused to stop. Jonah took a step closer, then another. He was within speaking distance now, but it wasn't words that would bridge the space. It was something older. "Asher," he murmured. "Go on, buddy." At the sound of his name, Asher, not Max, the dog tilted his head slightly. Then he moved by lightning. Her head snapped up, her eyes wild with disbelief. For a second she simply stared at the dog standing before her, breath caught halfway to a scream. Then she whispered the name that lived in the last unburned corner of her memory. "Max?" Her voice cracked in the middle, the syllable breaking into something raw and wide and frightened. Asher stood still. Then, just barely, his tail moved. Not a wag, not celebration, just a slow, careful sway like a memory finding its way home. Elise blinked rapidly, her eyes filling so fast that tears spilled over before she could react. She reached out a trembling hand, pausing an inch from his fur, as if afraid he would vanish. When her fingers touched his neck, her breath left her in a sob. "You came back." Asher leaned into her touch. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was quiet and weighted, like a dog remembering the scent of someone he was never meant to forget. Elise's hands buried themselves in his thick coat. She pressed her forehead to his shoulder and let herself cry. Not the dry, distant sorrow she'd been carrying for months, but the kind that cracked open ribs and let a soul breathe again. Jonah stood back, giving her space, his own throat tightening. Nala watched with ears pricked forward, then slowly sat beside him, as if she too recognized what was unfolding. Elise clung to the dog. Words tumbled from her in broken syllables. "I tried to wait. I didn't know what else to do. You were all I had left. I'm so sorry. So sorry." Asher didn't move. His body was warm against hers. He didn't lick her or nuzzle. He simply stayed. After a while she pulled back just enough to look at him. Her eyes were rimmed red, her cheeks wet, her voice a hoarse whisper. "Is he your son?" Jonah answered softly, stepping forward. She turned toward him, startled. She hadn't even noticed anyone else was there. "He's alive, Elise," Jonah said. "He's safe. Because of Max. Because of Asher." She gasped. A sound that was almost a laugh and almost a cry. Her knees gave out and she sat fully on the snow-covered ground. Her hands trembled as they went to her chest. Jonah knelt beside her, removing his gloves. He offered one to her, wordlessly. She took it, too shocked to speak. "What's his name?" she finally managed. "We haven't named him yet," Jonah said gently. "The doctors say he's strong, for everything he's been through." Elise shook her head slowly, eyes dazed. "I didn't leave him to die," she whispered. "I left him to Max. He always listened. I told him to find help. I told him, and he did," Jonah said. Snow continued to fall. Somewhere nearby, a child's laughter echoed faintly from a playground long abandoned for winter. Elise looked up again at the shepherd now sitting beside her. It was the same look he'd given her once, under another tree, when she had tucked a flower behind his ear and said, "You're the only one who understands." He had understood. He had never stopped. And now, through snow and sorrow and miles of silence, he had returned. Elise didn't move at first. She just stared into the amber eyes in front of her. the eyes of a dog she had once called her only friend. Her breath trembled. Her fingers gripped the fur at his neck like it was the edge of something solid in a world that had collapsed beneath her feet. And then, without warning, her body caved inward. She folded against him in a single motion, sobbing so violently, it seemed as if years of pain had finally found their exit. The sound wasn't elegant, wasn't poetic, it was raw and broken, jagged like glass in her lungs. Asher braced himself, but did not flinch. His muscles tightened just enough to support her. "You saved him," she whispered into his fur, the words muffled by the weight of her grief. Jonah watched silently, standing a few feet away, his hands in his coat pockets, not from the cold, but from the helplessness that always came when witnessing someone crack open. Nala stood beside him, ears tipped toward the two figures in the snow. Neither dog moved. "You saved him," Elise repeated, shaking now. "You remembered what I asked. You found someone." She didn't realize she was repeating herself. It was as though she had to say it again and again just to believe it. Asher remained still, his breathing slow and calm. His presence was the anchor she hadn't had in months. Jonah stepped forward at last, careful not to break the fragile thread of recognition that had formed between her and the old shepherd. "Elise." She turned slightly, her tear-streaked face barely registering him through the blur. "He's at the hospital," Jonah said gently. "Your son." Her body stiffened. "Alive?" Jonah nodded once, solemn and sure. "You should come," he said. "He's waiting. You both are." She looked down at Asher, still clinging to his coat like it was the only truth she could trust. "But I don't even know if I can." "You can," Jonah interrupted softly, "because he needs you. And because you already did the hardest part. You let him go to save him." Elise let out a dry, startled sob, a sound caught between guilt and relief. Jonah reached out a hand, but he didn't rush her. He offered it palm up, open, steady. For a moment, Elise only stared at it. Then she placed her trembling fingers in his. Her body was so light in his grip, he feared she might drift away if he let go. As he pulled her gently to her feet, she stumbled. Her legs had forgotten how to trust the earth. Jonah caught her elbow, steadying her, and for the briefest second she let herself lean against him. "I don't know what I'll find," she whispered. What if he doesn't?" "Waited too long?" Jonah looked at her with something between steadiness and sorrow. "He's just a baby. He won't remember faces, but he'll know love, and that's where you come in." Elise nodded slowly, tears still clinging to her lashes. She turned toward Asher. "You never forgot, did you?" she asked. The dog tilted his head. "You held on even when I couldn't." She knelt one last time, pressing her forehead to his for a brief second, and Asher's eyes closed, not from command, but from something quieter, familiar, grieved. Then she stood again, taller this time. Jonah turned toward the path leading out of the park, the snow still falling around them like a veil. He offered her his arm. Elise didn't hesitate this time. Asher and Nala fell into step beside them, one on each side, forming a silent escort of memory and loyalty. They walked slowly, not just because Elise's body was fragile, but because some journeys need to be taken with reverence. The path ahead wasn't paved with certainty, but it no longer led to silence. As they neared the parking lot, Elise turned her head and asked, voice still rough, "What did you call him, the baby?" "We didn't give him a name," Jonah said. "Didn't feel right until we knew who he was." She nodded, eyes searching the horizon. "His name is Caleb," she whispered. "It was my father's name." Jonah didn't say anything. He just nodded once, respectfully, like he understood that names were sacred things, especially when carried through darkness. They reached the cruiser. Jonah opened the door and helped her in, wrapping her in the emergency blanket that still held faint warmth from earlier. Asher hesitated at the back door, his paws muddy and wet. Elise looked at him, then back at Jonah. "He should come, please." Jonah opened the rear door. Asher hopped in, settling beside Elise like he had never left. The door shut with a soft thud. Nala took the front seat. And for the first time in months, maybe longer, Elise leaned her head back against the seat, her eyes closed, her breathing slow and uneven but steady. Jonah turned the key. The engine rumbled to life, and through the windshield, the first hint of dawn was breaking behind the snow-heavy pines. The hospital lobby was quiet at this hour, lit by soft fluorescence, muffled by sterile air, and wrapped in the kind of silence that only exists between midnight and dawn. The walls were painted the color of old linen, clean but tired. Elise stood near the elevator bank, her arms drawn tightly around her middle. Her coat hung off her frame like a curtain on a windless day. It still smelled faintly of snow and dog fur. The elevator chimed. Jonah pressed the button and the doors slid open with a mechanical sigh. "You don't have to say anything," he murmured. Every crosswalk, like someone who'd just returned from a place where light was rare. But now, as she stepped into the elevator, something shifted. Her legs hesitated just an instant before crossing the threshold. Like a part of her believed this was still a dream, and if she moved too fast, it might crack and vanish. Asher walked in first, not a glance behind, just the slow, measured pace of a dog who had done this before, who understood what it meant to wait, to bear witness. He settled on the floor beside her, his body close but not touching, his gaze cast forward as if guarding not the hallway but time itself. Nala padded in next, pressing her body gently against Elise's other side. Jonah took his place beside the elevator panel, pressed the button for the third floor, then stepped back. The doors slid closed with a hush, and they began to rise. Elise swallowed hard. Her hands twitched at her sides, then knotted again. She looked straight ahead, not at the numbers lighting up, but at her own reflection in the brushed metal wall. A woman she didn't recognize looked back. Eyes rimmed red, hair matted from wind and grief, cheekbones too sharp, lips too pale. She blinked, and for a moment saw herself as she had been, before Caleb's birth, before the silence, before Max had vanished into the trees. Jonah stole a glance her way but said nothing. The elevator creaked slightly as it moved. "He always hated elevators," she said suddenly. Her voice came out raspy, as if it hadn't been used in years. Jonah looked over. "Max?" he asked gently. She nodded. He'd tremble a little when the floor shifted beneath him. But he never barked, never whined, just stood beside me, like now. She reached down, fingers brushing Asher's fur. He always knew what I needed before I could speak it. Jonah's eyes softened. He still does. The elevator slowed. The number 3 glowed gold. "Are you ready?" he asked. Elise didn't answer right away. Her lips parted, then closed again. Her shoulders lifted in a shallow breath. "No," she admitted, "but I'm going anyway." Jonah gave a single nod, almost proud. That's usually how courage works. The doors opened. A soft hallway stretched ahead, pale green walls, framed drawings of woodland creatures, the kind that children might find comforting. Somewhere, a monitor beeped steadily. A nurse's shoe squeaked on linoleum. Jonah stepped out first. Asher rose, waited for Elise to move. She looked down at him, the way someone might look at a friend who never left, not even when the storms came. "You're still mine, aren't you?" she whispered. Asher wagged his tail once, slow, deliberate, then turned toward the hallway. She stepped out behind him. Nala brought up part in general, community for a cold, Mr. Carroll's. You afternoon zone was hand within ourit, on interest. She did. Now didst. Jonah cry and tridist, or re-listen to on one night. 60-10. Next door rooms, until Jonah stopped in front of one. Room 312. Jonah didn't touch her, didn't speak. He simply let the moment unfold. The room 3312. Elise froze. She was trembling now. Visibly. Jonah looked away, because there are moments in life that deserve privacy, even from compassion. Asher didn't move. He stood like a sentry just outside the room. Eyes soft, body still. Jonah looked away, like a sentry just outside the room. Eyes sterile. Sterile white sheets, heat lamp aglow above. Tubes she didn't understand ran from the small body, swaddled in a hospital blanket the color of rain. Elise stood still, one step short of the hospital room's threshold. Her breath fogged the glass in a small oval, then vanished. Inside, the baby stirred. His tiny chest rose and fell beneath layers of warmth. Monitors blinked in rhythm, steady and strong. There was something peaceful in the way his face relaxed. Not frozen in fear, not purple-lipped from cold anymore, but flushed gently with life. She whispered his name. Noah. It came out dry and thin, like faintly in the glass. A ghost in the hall of the living. You can go in, Jonah said softly. He's stable. She nodded but didn't move yet. Then Asher let out a quiet whine. Not urgent, not distressed, just enough to remind her it was time. He was always the one who knew when to move forward. Elise opened the door. A warm gust of filtered air touched her face. The quiet beep of machines grew louder. The scent of antiseptic mixed with talcum powder and something else. Life, maybe. Newness. The room was dim, but not dark. She stepped inside. The door clicked gently behind her. Noah lay still beneath the heating unit, a knitted cap covering his scalp. A nurse had tucked a soft fox plush at his side. There was a faint pink color in his cheeks now, the fragile hue of someone pulled back from the brink. Elise moved closer. Each step felt foreign. Her knees weak, her chest rising unevenly. Her fingers curled and uncurled, as if testing the air, measuring its forgiveness. She reached the crib, then stopped. Her hand hovered above him, afraid to touch. "Is it really you?" she whispered. The baby's fingers twitched, a tiny movement, barely there. But it sent something surging through her chest. Heat, ache, love, disbelief, all at once. Elise lowered her hand and brushed the edge of the blanket. Her skin met warmth, real warmth, not imagined. His eyelids fluttered, not fully open. But there was recognition in the subtle turn of his face, in the soft curl of his fingers. He knew. She sank to her knees beside the crib, forehead nearly touching the rail. "I thought I lost you," she choked. "I thought I was too late." Tears came, not the frantic sobs of earlier days, but the slow, reverent kind. The ones that feel earned. The ones that flow after holding your breath for too long. Her shoulders shook. Her hand found his again. The infant stirred. Noah's fingers brushed hers, barely, but he held on. That touch, small, impossibly soft, felt stronger than anything she'd ever known. Not a grasp, not yet. But it was connection, recognition, forgiveness, maybe. Behind her, the door stayed closed. No one intruded. Even the machines, seemed to soften their rhythms. The moment stretched, wordless, sacred. Elise leaned forward, lips brushing the back of his hand. "You waited for me," she whispered. Words were needed, because sometimes the smallest sound, like a baby's breath or the rustle of a dog's tail, was louder than any declaration. The room was quiet, save for the soft, rhythmic beeping of the monitor. Elise leaned forward, her forehead gently touching her son's. Her tears fell in silence. Not frantic now, but like rain on warm soil, cleansing, necessary. She stayed that way for minutes, unmoving, breathing in his scent, as if the faint smell of formula and hospital cotton could anchor her to reality. "Hi, baby," she whispered, the words catching like a fragile song between her lips. "Mommy's here." Noah stirred beneath the warm glow of the heating unit. His eyelids fluttered, but didn't fully open. His lips parted with a soft, instinctual sound. He didn't need to see her to know her. Somewhere in the murmur of her voice, in the salt of her breath, he remembered. And she felt it. The knowing. Her hand, trembling, cupped his tiny shoulder. And this time, he didn't just twitch. He leaned into it slightly, like a seedling toward light. That single motion cracked something wide open inside her. Elise sobbed, not from sorrow, but from the sheer weight of being given a second chance. She didn't speak again. Didn't need to. She simply stayed, forehead to forehead, heartbeat to heartbeat, trying to convince herself this wasn't some fragile dream. Outside the room, Olivia Lang stood with arms crossed, but her hand covered her mouth. She wasn't supposed to cry. Not here. Not now. Not after all these years in emergency care, after every overdose, accident, or stillbirth she'd weathered with clinical detachment. But something about this silent reunion under sterile light, pierced through the walls she'd built. Through the glass, she watched Elise fold inward, her body protecting the child, as if to shield him from even the memory of cold. Her hair hung loose, tangled at the ends, her coat still damp from snow. She looked like someone who had been lost for a long time, and just now found her way back. "That dog," Olivia murmured aloud, "trained." Inside the room, Elise finally sat back. Her face was blotched red, cheeks wet with streaks, eyes rimmed in exhaustion, but she was there, fully present. She stroked Noah's cheek with 2 fingers, marveling at the softness, the life pulsing just beneath. "You stayed brave," she whispered, "just like Max. Just like Asher." She turned slightly toward the window, meeting the eyes of the dog, who hadn't left her once. "You never forgot, did you?" Asher blinked, just once, but it felt like a conversation. Outside, Olivia dabbed her eyes and stepped away. She'd seen enough. Inside, Jonah stepped in slowly, resting a hand on the foot of the crib. He didn't speak either. The moment was hers. But Elise looked up, her voice raw and low. "How did you know he'd find him?" Jonah glanced at Asher, then back to her. He didn't need to be told. He remembered the baby's scent, He remembered you. Elise's lips parted. Her gaze dropped to Noah. All this time, I thought I was alone. You weren't, Jonah said. He didn't forget you. Not once. She looked back at Asher. Something in her expression shifted. Not just recognition, but reverence. The way one might look at a chapel, or the last photo of someone long gone. But this was no memory. He was still here, still watching. She got up slowly, walked to the door, and opened it. Asher remained seated. She crouched and placed a hand gently on his head. Then, without speaking, she leaned forward and kissed the top of it, just between the ears, where the fur grew softest. "Thank you," she whispered, "for carrying me through when I couldn't carry myself." And for the first time, Asher let out a soft exhale. Not a bark, not a whimper, just the release of breath. The sound of something ending and beginning again. The night deepened outside. Snow continued to fall, quiet, slow, like a blessing. Inside, Silver Pine General, the light in Noah's room glowed steadily. A mother, curled beside her child's bed, one hand resting near his heart. A dog lay just outside the door, unmoving, but ever watchful. And a man stood down the hall, not in uniform now, but in something. The porch, sweater sleeves over her hands, watching Jonah's cruiser disappear down the road. Asher sat beside her until the car turned out of sight. Then he nudged her leg and padded inside. She followed. The living room smelled faintly of lemon oil and old pine. A pot of stew simmered. A gift from Edna Larrabee next door, who walked with a cane wrapped in pink yarn and smelled like lavender and flower. The house wasn't new, but the feeling was. Down the hall, Noah slept under a patchwork quilt. His fever was gone. The oxygen tubes were history. His color had returned. So had his laugh. Beside his pillow, a worn stuffed bear, found by Edna, cleaned and wordlessly offered, hadn't left his side. Only one photo hung on the wall. Olivia had taken it before discharge. Noah asleep in the hospital bed. Asher curled at his feet, both lit by afternoon sun. Elise had taped it over the nightstand. Each morning she stood before it and breathed. A reminder. They'd survived. At 10 a.m., a knock. 3 raps and a cheerful voice. "Cinnamon rolls, still warm." Elise opened the door to find Edna balancing a tray, cheeks flushed from the cold. She didn't wait for an invite, just stepped in. "Your boy needs fattening up, and so do you." Asher wagged once. Nala, who stayed over some nights, thumped her tail from the rug. Edna made herself at home, checking the fridge, tapping the heater. "You remembering to sleep, Elise?" There it was. "Trying," Elise answered, softly. Later, while Edna helped Noah make paper snowflakes, Elise sat on the porch steps with Asher. Bare branches threw long shadows across the yard. 2 sparrows landed on the railing and flew off again. "I used to think I ruined him," she said quietly. That night, the choice I made. Asher didn't move, just listened. But you stayed. For him. For me. She scratched behind his ear. His eyes closed. There was no word for what he meant to her, not in any language she knew. Just gratitude, deep and wordless. Thank you, she whispered. Inside, Noah laughed. Edna danced a snowflake on a string like a puppet. For the first time in years, Elise didn't feel like a visitor in someone else's joy. She belonged. Saturday came. The sun rose slowly, painting the rooftops with light. Inside they made coffee. Nala stole toast. Asher stayed by the doorway like a sentinel. Outside, Noah ran through the yard pretending with sticks, inventing quests. Just breath and bark and the weight of a Saturday. By mid-morning, they sat on the porch, 3 mugs, 2 dogs, 1 piece. He's getting stronger, Jonah said. Elise nodded, and louder. A robin landed on the railing. Asher blinked once, then laid his head down. You ever think, Elise began, that maybe things come undone, just to be rebuilt the right way? Jonah sipped his coffee. Sometimes it's not rebuilding, it's letting go of what was never whole. She looked at her hands. He doesn't remember the worst parts. That's okay, Jonah said. You do. That's the hardest part. Jonah didn't offer comfort, he just stayed, the kind of presence that doesn't need to fix anything to matter. Noah ran up, plopped between the dogs. I'm teaching Nala to find treasure. Almost found a spoon, he added, but Asher sat on it. Jonah smirked. Strategic sabotage. No, he already knows everything, Noah whispered. Asher didn't move, but his tail thumped once. They stayed like that until the porch turned gold with shadows. Noah napped, curled between the dogs, blanket over him. Elise snapped a photo, but mostly she just stared. Grief had taught her, moments fade, but memory, when it lands in the heart, stays. He didn't just save Noah, she said. Jonah raised his mug. He saved you too. As the sun dipped, Elise gathered Noah in her arms. See you next Saturday? Jonah stood. Wouldn't miss it. Asher hesitated at the car door, then turned, pressed his nose to Noah's cheek, and climbed in. Elise whispered, same time next week. That night, she looked at the stars and said thank you to the universe, to dogs that never forget, to second chances that feel like home. The next Saturday, the sun set slow over Snowford. Crickets began to hum. Inside, the kitchen smelled of toast and soap. Noah's crayon drawing lay on the table. 2 stick figures, a dog labeled me, Mom, Ash. Elise watched from the window as Noah played in the yard, tossing pine cones. Nala chased them. Asher sat nearby, watchful as ever. Jonah stood in the doorway. Quiet. Then, we ran his chip, he said. Elise turned slowly, bracing. The registry's still active. Same name, same owner. He met her eyes. He was yours. From the beginning. The words landed like snow, silent but undeniable. Her hand moved to her chest. Max, she whispered. Jonah nodded. He never left. She stepped outside. Elise traced her mug. I don't remember it all, but I remember sending him, told him to go, gave him Noah's blanket. She paused. I thought I'd never see him again, but he found you. Jonah nodded. He found us both. Asher lay near Noah, one eye open, always watching. He carried a piece of me, Elise whispered, when I couldn't anymore. That's what they do, Jonah said. The good ones. They hold the line until we can return. Later, Jonah stood at the door. "You okay?" Elise smiled faintly. "I think so." She rested her hand on the frame. "You're not taking him back, are you?" Jonah shook his head. "He was always yours." She nodded, eyes misting. "Thank you." Jonah looked down at Asher, who'd come to stand beside her, tail still. "He chose you," Jonah said. "He always did." And in the hush that followed, Elise knew. Some dogs don't follow orders. They follow hearts. There were nights when the wind clawed through the walls like a living thing, sharp, hungry, unforgiving. Nights when the cold wasn't just outside, but inside bones and breath, where hope curled up small and quiet. In that forgotten cabin, buried deep in the snow belt of nowhere, unmarked on maps and untouched by mercy, a child slept under a blanket that once was blue. The fabric, stiff with cold and use, barely held in the warmth of a fire long gone. And beside him, curled tight against the edge of the crib, lay a dog. His name had once been Max, but in those nights, he wasn't just Max. He was more than fur and fang, more than bark and bite. He was sentinel, guardian, the last line between innocence and the dark. He didn't sleep. He couldn't. When the coyotes howled, he listened, not with fear, but with calculation. When the beams groaned beneath the weight of snow, he stayed still, ears twitching to measure every creak. He was waiting for something, maybe danger, maybe salvation. But most of all, he was waiting for her to breathe again. Elise sat in the corner of the cabin, knees to her chest, eyes hollowed by nights too long and mornings too empty. Sometimes she rocked, sometimes she didn't, but always she watched Max, and in that watching found enough strength to stay. The baby, Noah, was too young to understand the silence or the hunger or the chill that wrapped itself around their tiny home like a curse. He only knew the scent of his mother's hair, the rhythm of her heartbeat when she held him close, and the quiet presence of the dog who never strayed far. The day Elise gave up the crib, nosed the baby's chest gently. One last warmth check, one final promise. Then he lay down beside him, just as he had every night before, not because he was told, but because something inside him needed to. He stayed there until morning, until the first gray light spilled in between the wooden slats of the shuttered windows, until Noah stirred in his sleep and the world tilted forward again. Then, and only then, did Max rise and step into the cold. He didn't look back. In the days before the rescue, there had been one night colder than the rest. A frost crawled across the walls like veins of glass. Noah's cough shook his tiny frame. Elise tried everything, bundling him tighter, holding him close, whispering lullabies that cracked in her throat. She wept quietly into his hair, apologizing for a world too cruel for mothers like her. The fire had dimmed to ash, the last log burned hollow. Max, sensing the drop, rose from his spot and crossed to the crib. He pressed his body against the slats, shielding Noah from the wind seeping through the cracks. He stayed like that all night, motionless, alert. When Noah whimpered, Max gently pushed the blanket back with his nose. No command needed, no reward expected. Because some dogs don't need training to understand what matters. They remember. Instinct is memory wrapped in devotion. Years later, in the warmth of Snowford, Elise stood in Noah's new room. The crib was white now, safe. The walls painted soft green. Sunlight filtered through cotton curtains, dancing across a stack of picture books. On the floor, folded neatly, was the old blanket. Still blue, barely. Its edges frayed, its softness long gone, and beside it, curled in silence, lay Asher. Older now, grayer, but still watching. No one had asked him to lie there. He had simply chosen it. Same position, same stillness, as if honoring something sacred. Elise sank to the floor beside him. Her hand reached for the fabric. She closed her eyes and remembered. Fully, painfully. The nights when she believed she wouldn't make it. The moments when she had nothing left to give. And the dog, this dog, had held that hope for her, carried it, protected it, until she could come back to it. When Jonah knocked on the door later that evening, she didn't rise. She was still there, hand resting on Asher's side, eyes rimmed red but clear. "You okay?" he asked softly. She nodded. He the field, watching. Always watching. Nala, younger and leaner, sat beside him. She didn't fidget, didn't bark. She had learned the stillness from him. She had once been a blur of motion, energy always brimming, but now, after the snow, after the rescue, she'd changed. It started with how she looked at Elise, not as a leader, not as a source of food or command, but as something more fragile, more sacred. She watched how Asher moved, quiet, measured, never rushing. She learned how to listen without reacting, how to sit with sadness, how to answer pain with presence. Elise noticed. One afternoon, Elise sat with a photo in her hand, Noah, only days old, swaddled in flannel. Asher in the background, a shadow of loyalty, her hand trembled. Across the room, Nala approached quietly, not for a treat, not for play, just to be near. "I'm still scared," Elise whispered. Nala placed her head on Elise's knee. No training, just knowing. That week, Noah dropped his toy behind the radiator, a red fox worn at the tail. He stood, frozen, on the verge of tears. Nala crept forward, stretched a paw, dragged it out, gently, placed it at his feet. The boy laughed, loud and pure, then hugged her neck. From across the room, Asher blinked, a slow nod, passing the torch. That night, as dusk brushed the world in gray, Nala walked into Noah's room. She curled beside the crib, not in Asher's spot, but close. She didn't sleep, just watched. Asher stood in the hallway, tail wagging once, then turned, stepped outside, and stared at the stars. His job wasn't done, but it was no longer his alone. At the snow-forged shelter, Elise folded coats with steady hands. No one asked her story. No one needed to. She helped where she could, quietly, fully. "You fold like someone who's lost something," one man said gently. "I did," she replied. He nodded. "Me too." And that was enough. She was no longer the woman from the cabin, not yet whole, but no longer shattered. She laughed more, smiled faster, let Jonah hold her hand when it shook. And Noah, brave, bright Noah, laughed at birds, shared toys, and whispered, Max in his dreams. They didn't correct him. Max had never really left. One cold morning, Elise unlocked the shelter early. Her reflection caught in the glass. Straight shoulder, like someone relearning how to breathe, but still surprised by the air. Then it came. A ringtone, not her current phone, but the one she had buried in a drawer months ago. A relic of the life before Snowford, before warmth, before names mattered. It came muffled from beneath the sink. Her hands froze in the water. She dried them carefully and opened the drawer. The screen blinked. One new voicemail. She carried it to the back room, sat on the edge of the bed. Asher padded in quietly, settling a few feet away, present but not intruding. She pressed play. Elise, it's me. I saw something online about a boy. The name, the timing, it has to be him. I don't know if I should be calling, but if he's safe, thank you. I guess I just needed to know. The timestamp, 11 minutes ago. She sat with it in silence, not just the message, but everything it implied. Not anger, not longing, just stillness. A heavy kind. Her thumb hovered, then pressed delete. Not in fear, not in cruelty, but with clarity. That voice belonged to a chapter already closed. Not erased, but no longer home. Behind her, Noah stood rubbing his eyes, the corner of his blanket dragging like a soft tail. Mama? She opened her arms. He climbed in, head against her chest. Asher inched closer, resting his chin across both their feet. A sentinel. Still. That night, moonlight pooled across the kitchen floor. Elise sat on the porch as the radiator hissed behind her. The stars above Snowford looked like Braille, spelling something only the still-hearted could read. Jonah pulled up, headlights dimmed. Nala padded beside him. He held a brown paper bag. Brought stew, he said simply. You always do. They ate quietly. After a while, Elise said, Someone from before called, about Noah. I listened, then erased it. Jonah didn't flinch, just nodded into the darkness. Sometimes closure isn't about hearing answers, he said. It's choosing not to reopen the wound. You think I did the right thing? He looked at her. I think you did the brave thing, and those are rarely the same. Later inside, through the open window came Noah's soft laughter in his sleep. It arrived on a Wednesday, a bundle wrapped in brown paper, tucked beside the milk crate on the porch. No note, just a label in blue ink. For Noah. Inside was a quilt, worn, soft, and smelling faintly of cedar and lavender. It was made from stitched pieces of denim, flannel, cotton florals, even a strip of what looked like apron fabric, and all across it, stitched paw prints, large and small, like a quiet parade. In the corner it read in fine thread, For the ones who never left. Elise ran her hand across the stitching, breath-catching. That after gift to be acknowledged. It was a benediction. That evening, Elise tucked it near the edge of Noah's crib, not as a blanket, but a mark of memory. She smoothed the stitched words with trembling fingers. Her eyes burned, but she didn't cry. Some things are honored better in silence. Jonah arrived as dusk folded in. Come see what Edna made, she whispered. They stood in the doorway. The last light caught the paw prints and cast shadows on the wall like ghostly guardians. Jonah touched the quilt, then Elise's shoulder. It's perfect, he said. Asher walked in, paused by the crib, then leaned down and pressed his nose to the stitched words before stepping back. Not a goodbye, just understanding. The next night snow returned, not bitter, but soft, the kind that hushes everything. Elise curled on the couch with a mug of tea, knees drawn to her chest. The window was cracked just enough to let in the cold and the sound of quiet. Across the street, Edna's porch light flickered once, then held. Noah slept inside. Asher snored gently near the hearth. And in that gentle stillness, surrounded by memory and paw prints, Elise finally realized this place wasn't a pause. It was home. Not perfect, not painless, but spacious, for grief and growth and grace. In Jonah's home, hours later, the snow still fell. He sat at the kitchen table writing by lamplight, his tea steamed beside an open notebook. Asher lay near the fire. Nala dreamed beside him. The letter wasn't meant to be sent, just written, for Claire. Claire, it snowed again tonight, the soft kind. I met a woman named Elise, and a boy named Noah, and a dog named Asher. Though he used to be Max, you'd like them. Not because they're perfect, but because they carry things quietly. The way you said mattered most. His handwriting faltered, but he continued. Asher isn't mine. He stayed when no one asked him to. Because of him, a baby's alive tonight. A mother found her way back. You remember that night after the flood? You cried not because she was hurt, but because she was safe. I think I finally understand. Saving someone isn't just pulling them out of danger. It's reminding them they're seen, that they matter. He paused, looked to the fire. Asher's eyes met his, calm and knowing. You once told me the opposite of death wasn't life, it was presence. Being there. I'm still learning how to stay. Tonight, I saw a boy laugh, and a woman soften, because a dog remembered, because he didn't forget what mattered. He closed the notebook. Someone isn't about heroism. It's about not letting go, about being the quiet presence when the world forgets how to stay, like a dog curled beside a crib or a letter never sent. The trail had narrowed over the winter, softened at the edges by time and snow. Branches leaned in, dusted white, as if the forest itself wanted to listen. Jonah walked slowly, boots crunching in fresh powder. Beside him, Asher moved with quiet grace, nose low, ears flicking. Nala trotted behind, still younger, more restless, but today she matched their pace. She understood. There was no rush, only memory. The clearing opened before them. The cabin was gone now, leveled by storm and time. Only the chimney stones remained, but the place remembered. Jonah could feel it. In the hush of the wind, in the way Asher stopped, staring at the empty space where a crib had once stood, where a boy had cried and survived, where a dog had stayed. Jonah knelt at the stump where it all began, the one where he first saw the prints that led him to a dog, and then to a life. From his coat he pulled a small wooden sign, carefully carved and smoothed by hand. He pressed it gently into the frozen ground beside the stump. Noah's hope. Let those who pass here know. Someone stayed. Asher sat beside him, fur dusted in snow. He didn't move, just watched. Jonah whispered into the silence. This wasn't just about survival. It was about faith, about waiting. Asher rose and walked to the center of the clearing, the place where he'd once curled around a crib, shielding a child from wind and hunger. He didn't lie down, just stood, facing the woods. Jonah followed his gaze, snow and pine, nothing else. But Asher remembered, a last patrol. Nala joined him, mirroring his steps, nose to the wind, eyes soft. She was learning, not commands, but presence. By the time they returned to Jonah's side, snow had gathered in the lines of his coat and in the corners of his eyes. He stood. Time to go. Asher lingered for a moment longer, then turned. The wind brushed across the new sign, but the words stayed, not just carved in wood, but in time. Beneath the old oak tree behind the house, Asher lay in the grass. His chest rose slow and steady. His muzzle had grayed, his gait softened, but his eyes were still sharp with memory. Noah lay curled beside him, cheek resting on his ribs. "You see that?" Noah whispered, pointing skyward. A cloud drifted overhead, shaped like a boat. Another followed behind, like a dog chasing the tide. Noah giggled softly. Asher's tail thumped once. From the porch, Nala, who Noah had once called Apollo, watched with quiet focus. No tension, just presence. Jonah stood at the fence, coffee in hand.
"Now," Jonah nodded. He never needed words, he just showed up. They watched as Noah placed a small hand behind Asher's ear, the gesture full of trust. Asher didn't move. He didn't need to. "Sometimes I think he knew," Elise said. "What would break? What would heal?" "He did," Jonah replied. The breeze carried the scent of apples and damp soil. Time moved gently. Noah looked back toward the house, caught Elise's eye and waved. She waved back, smiling. "Stay a little longer, okay?" Noah whispered. "Just a little." Asher exhaled, a long, even breath that settled into the earth. That night, as frost crept over the porch railings, Jonah stepped out with a blanket, not for warmth, for ritual. Asher lay beneath the oak tree, still breathing, but slower now. Jonah sat beside him. "You did good," he said, voice raw. "Better than most men I know." He rested a hand between the old dog's shoulders. "I don't know what comes next, but whatever you gave that boy, whatever you gave all of us, it was enough." Asher didn't lift his head, but his tail tapped once against the ground. A whisper or a goodbye. The next morning, the sky over Snowford cleared with patience, as if it had been holding its breath for years. At the edge of town, where two fences met beneath a dogwood tree, a child walked, flanked by two shadows that weren't shadows at all. Asher led, slower now, deliberate. Nala walked close at Noah's heel, stepping where he stepped. In Noah's pocket a folded drawing fluttered. 3 figures under a sun. Him, Asher, and Nala. The lines weren't perfect, but the eyes were. From a distance it looked like any other walk. But if you stood still long enough, the silence told more. Behind them was memory. Ahead, something unnamed, but full of light. Inside the house, Elise stood at the window, cradling a warm mug, watching, not with fear, with faith. She'd learned that from the quiet of snowstorms and porch nights and the steady breath of a dog who stayed. Jonah sat behind her, scratching Nala's ears. "She's growing into it," he said. "She had the best teacher," Elise whispered. Outside, Noah stopped at a patch of flattened snow. Asher had paused, nostrils flaring, as if catching a scent the world had long forgotten. Then he walked on. Nala followed. Noah smiled, not the kind that forgets, the kind that knows. He pulled a small wooden token from his pocket, carved into it A.S. Jonah had given it to him weeks ago. Fear, but in memory. The storm had passed, and beneath the clearing sky they walked on, together. Sometimes the most powerful bonds in life are the ones that don't require words. A dog doesn't ask for much, just a place by your side, a glance that says, "I see you," and a promise not to leave when things get hard. Stories like this remind us that love doesn't always come wrapped in grand gestures. Sometimes it lies in quiet loyalty, in muddy paw prints on the porch, or a head resting on your lap when you didn't realize how much you needed comfort. If this story stirred something in you, if it made you think of your own dog, or maybe a dog you once knew,
I gently encourage you to take a look at a resource I've found helpful. It's not flashy, just something that might deepen the connection you already have with your companion. You'll find the link below. No pressure, just a quiet suggestion from one dog lover to another. Because in the end, what we share with our animals isn't about training or commands, it's about trust. And trust, once given freely, has a way of lasting a lifetime.